It's Wednesday, October 25th, 2023. It's 3 o'clock, and this is the October meeting of the Champaign-Urbana Mass Transit District Board. At this time, I'll ask the clerk for roll call.
Barnes.
Here.
Chaplin.
Here.
Delgado. Fasella.
Present.
Hannon.
Here.
Nudo. Dial.
Here.
Quorum is present.
Thank you. At this time, I'd also like to introduce our new advisory board member, Vincent Wu. I'll give Vincent a moment to introduce himself.
Hello everyone, I'm Vincent, and my Chinese name is Shoutao Wu, and Vincent is fine for me. I'm from U of I, Illinois Student Council, and I'm on the Environmental Sustainability Committee branch, and I'm the coordinator there. I'm a first-year grad student in MFA Design for Responsible Innovation, and my current interest is sustainable design. And I have to say I have a kind of relationship with transportation because I've also done a program with MAS, which is Mobility as a Service program design back in China, and which is to enhance the accessibility of transportation for elderly digital refugees. So anyways, I'm really excited to be here and see what I can do here with the sustainable transformation with MTD. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Vincent. We certainly appreciate your participation in our board and look forward to speaking with you. All right, our next item will be moving on to the approval of our agenda for today's meeting. I'll ask for a motion in a second.
Seconded.
It's been moved and seconded to approve our agenda as submitted. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? That motion carries. Audience participation. Anyone in the audience like to speak to the board at this time? Seeing none, we'll move into the approval of our minutes from our board meeting, our open session of September 27th, 2023. After your review, a motion and a second. It's moved and seconded to approve the board meeting open session minutes from September 27th, 2023. All in favor? Opposed? That motion carries. Communications. Anything, Carl? Board, any communications you'd like to share? Seeing none, we'll move right into the Managing Director's report. Carl.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair. The beginning of this report is based on September 2023 statistics. September of 2023 is a bit of a milestone for us because it's the first month since February of 2020 that our ridership has exceeded 1 million. So we did that with a fairly regular frequency pre-pandemic, and then the pandemic hit, so it's not so frequent anymore, but we're coming back, baby. So that's good news. All right, so that we had 1,016,696 rides in September, and that is a 9.3% increase from September of 2022. And what's maybe significant about that is that September of 2022 had one more U of I weekday and 2 more Champaign School District days and 1 more Urbana School District day than September of 2023. So those tend to be higher ridership days for us when the U of I and both school districts are in session. And so that's significant that we were 9.3% higher than last September, but we had fewer school days to work with. So that's great news.
Carl?
Yes.
Do we furnish bus rides from, say, downtown Champaign or Urbana to the football games, basketball games?
We do. We have a route that we call the transport. It's a combination of the word transit or transportation and sport. So that route runs on U of I football home days, and we have 2 versions of the route. One leaves from Urbana to the stadium, and one leaves from downtown Champaign to the stadium. We, a long time ago, had a transport route that also ran on basketball, home basketball days, but we discontinued that, and we only run the football one now. Okay, That's ridership. Moving on to our operating revenue. Let's see. You can go back to that, Tech. So this is a snapshot of what I've been showing you for the last couple of years now, just so that you can visually see what our growth has been. I was referencing February 2020, but 2019 was fiscal year 2019, and so September of 2019 was the last pre-pandemic September, so you can see our climb back since the pandemic set in. Okay, now moving on to operating revenue. Our revenue was up 22.6% above last September, and our operating revenue is 25.9% above the year-to-date for fiscal year 2023. A reminder, we're in fiscal year 2024 right now. The operating expenses were also up. They are up 8.4% above September of 2022, and the year-to-date operating expenses were 8.3% above FY 2023. The year-to-date revenue and expenses, the operating revenues are already $415,000, almost $416,000 above budget, and the operating expenses are $1.3 million below budget. Just want to point out a couple of items for you to digest. One is that next week on November 1st, on the Lifetime channel, they air a program called Military Makeover, and they occasionally do a special section of that program that is transportation focused. And so they came to Champaign-Urbana a couple of weeks ago, and they are highlighting several veterans who work for MTD, and they will be highlighted during the segment of the Military Makeover program. So that's November 1st and November 8th, so check your local listings or your streaming service or however you watch TV nowadays, because it should be a good program. We're very excited about our veterans, but also what we do with hiring and providing great benefits for our veterans. The other thing is, I wanted to just reiterate something that I had mentioned to the board, that on Friday the 13th, not normally a good day, but this year the Department of Energy released its awards for their green hydrogen hubs. They announced 8 awards, 8 or 9, I don't remember off the top of my head, and it's more than $8 billion worth of funding that they're providing. And the Midwest Hub proposal, which is called MACH H2, M-A-C-H H2, was one of the awardees for $1 billion. Up to $1 billion. So that is really significant. This, I think, in just a few short years will really expand the supply of hydrogen, but significantly it'll be green produced hydrogen. And so that gives MTD and many other transit systems, and also all kinds of other hydrogen off-takers, green options for hydrogen. So that's really great news. Tangentially related to that, the 10 hydrogen buses that we have being built at New Flyer Industries right now in Anniston, Alabama. The first bus should be arriving here in Champaign-Urbana in about 2 weeks or so. And that's the first of 10, and so they'll roll in roughly 1 every 2 weeks. It's kind of a slow schedule on the production for a variety of reasons that I won't bore you with. But anyway, the first one will be in, and so we'll start commissioning that vehicle, and we should have that ready to go into service by the end of December or early January. Phil?
Totally off topic, but I'm dying to know, how do you drive a hydrogen bus from Alabama to Illinois? You've got to be refueling somewhere. Do you call United Fuel and have them show up with a tanker of hydrogen, or how does that work?
Great question, and the answer is you don't. They trailer the buses here. They load them up on a trailer. Not such a big deal with a 40-foot bus like these 10. The 60-foot buses that we received a couple years ago.
That would be an expensive permit.
What's that?
That would be an expensive, oversized permit.
Yeah, it's quite a process watching them load and unload an articulated bus on a trailer. But yeah, there aren't a lot of hydrogen fueling stations in between or around yet. But with the green hydrogen hubs, hopefully that will change. And with that, I think that's all I've got. So I will take any questions that you have, any additional questions that you have through page 35 of the board packet.
Questions for Carl and his report? Al?
Yeah, I have a question on the budget process altogether. Where we do the analysis report, you've got actual versus budget variance. Is it possible to sneak in another slash there and have last year in there? Because sometimes our budgets are predicated on full amount of drivers, et cetera, and I think it's just as appropriate to know what we're spending this year versus last year. The
So
budget
that
sometimes
information is on there.
How do I find it?
Let's go to page, just for an example, page 16. It's the first page of that report. The first column is September of 2023, and then the second column is budget for the September of 2023, and then the third column is September of 2022.
Right.
So you can see a comparison right there from the month of this year and then the month of last year. And then the categories, the name of the categories is in the middle of the page, and on the right-hand side you have the actual year-to-date and last year-to-date. And so you get the same information from this year and last year year-to-date as you do on the left side of the page for the month.
But it's actual versus budget. Your percentage variance is actual versus budget.
Oh,
I wanted versus last year, because, for example, the first line, adult fares, is down 10% to the budget, but actually ahead of last year.
Right.
You see that?
Yes. I can check with finance, but I think that this is a baked-in report to what the financial system produces. I don't know how much flexibility we have on changing that. That is why I calculate, what you're actually asking for, Al, is what I report to you on the numbers that we were just talking about. Yeah. I compare it to the month from the previous fiscal year, because I agree with you. But this report that's run from the financial package software, this is the report that they run. We can check to see what kind of flexibility we have.
Sometimes you're allowed to have some an additional column in there or something that would show it.
If it's a real high quality product, that is sometimes true.
On page 17, the question I had was on tax revenue, which is kind of interesting. Tax revenue, middle of the page, 2449998 this year. Last year, 2449998. Were we shortchanged on taxes because they hadn't reconciled all their problems internally?
We're not shortchanged on anything.
Is it delayed?
There is sometimes a delay, but that just can happen any year that it's delayed. But then there are the I'm trying to blank on the word. Sorry, not grievance, but the people file a petition for a lower tax bill, and so some money gets held back until those get resolved.
It's just strange they have the same number in this year and last year.
Yeah, I could address that.
Generally what happens is this is a month that we didn't actually get a payment, and so this is a budgeted number, or it's an amortized number, sorry. And so we take what we expect to get for the entire year, and then we amortize that over the course of the year. It's not reflecting an actual cash disbursement to us.
So don't believe this report.
Well, I mean, that's how accounting works. Michelle, if you want to weigh into how accounting works, it's an accrual system of accounting, and that's what both the federal and the state government require us to do.
We just had not updated our accrual number yet because the tax levy wasn't done yet. And honestly, sometimes we're crunched for time. And so that number was pretty close, so we went with that one.
Okay, thank you. That's all I have.
Okay.
Carl, in comparing September of '23 with September of '22, you need a inflation factor on the September '22 to be able to compare them. Got to compare them in the same dollars. Inflation would have raised that first September number $4,000 or $5,000 in September 21. You can't compare that actual number to what happened in September of '23.
Well, that would be a different kind of comparison, but the comparison that we're doing is just actual cash. I don't know, are you looking at
doesn't
revenue
mean
or
anything.
expenses?
That doesn't mean anything.
Well, that's the comparison that we do. If the board wants me to calculate inflation every month, we can do that.
Even if we applied a inflation factor, that wouldn't necessarily mean anything because it would depend on exactly what the thing was you were buying. And so there does get to be a granular, you could spend a lot of time getting lots of detailed information that may not provide that much more value. I do hear what you're saying, and the numbers are higher because of inflation, but fuel would be way higher than like an office supply.
I missed all that. That's okay, I'll talk to you later.
Al, would you shut off your microphone? Thanks. Any other questions for Carl on his report? Seeing none, I did want to just mention, I think it's great that we have a number of our employees who served in the military have been recognized, and I think we should, make a real effort to recognize all of our employees who have served in the armed forces, and we're super thankful for their service. With that, we're going to move into our first action item, which is Resolution 2023-5, and that will be determining the amount of money necessary to be raised by the tax levy. Carl.
All right, thank you. This is our annual multi-step process that we go through to put our tax levy in with the county. And so this is step one when you pass a tax levy resolution, and then we will post this action today. We will display the resolution, we'll publish a notice about what the resolution indicates, and then at the next board meeting, which is in early December, we'll hold a tax levy hearing prior to the board meeting, and then you'll take up the action to approve the tax levy ordinance. So, we have had for many years now things are up in the air because of the lawsuits associated with the hospital properties and whether or not they will or will not be on the tax rolls. And so we've calculated the levy with the assumption that the hospitals would be included in case the lawsuit gets resolved and some of the properties are included. Then the levy will take advantage of the additional value of those properties. If they're not included, then the tax levy would not increase by the amount that is in the resolution and the eventual ordinance. It still will be capped at the CPI rate. And so we have done that as a protective measure because of the PTEL law, the property tax extension limitation law, commonly referred to as tax caps. When new property comes onto the tax rolls, you can only capture it in that first year that it's eligible. You can never capture it after that. And so we've done this so that we had that momentary opportunity to capture it. This year, we've calculated that, and The percentage comes out to, after that calculation, to 13.08%. And just to reiterate, if the hospital properties are not put on the tax rolls, then the levy increase would only be what the level of CPI is for the revenue year. And so the resolution that you have in front of you reflects that calculation.
Carl, why has it been dropping, except for 2016, consistently dropping over the years?
Yeah, the reason that has been happening is, let me go to that sheet. So in 2016, we had an estimate for the EAV of the hospital properties based on appraisals and that kind of thing. Because the lawsuit has been ongoing since then, we don't have any updated information, so I'm actually still using that same number. So your comment, Bruce, about not taking into account inflation, the number that I'm using to calculate does not take in any inflationary aspect or growth in the EAV. I'm still using that same number. I think it's okay that we're doing that because that is the EAV based on the entirety of the properties involved with the hospitals. I don't think anybody actually thinks 100% of the properties are going to go back on the tax rolls. And so we're using 100% of the number because it's a number that we have. But if they say, instead of 100% of the property going back on the tax rolls, 30% of the property goes on the tax rolls, then the number that we have will accommodate that, even though the value of that number has been going down since the lawsuit was first filed. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Go ahead, Phil.
It's my annual gripe, but my perspective always is that a renter or an owner in an apartment or a house that's worth about $100,000 in Champaign-Urbana is paying roughly $120,000 a year, or $10 a month to the Mass Transit District. And that seems like a small amount, but combined with another half dozen tiny taxing bodies like we have in Illinois, it really makes a big hole in somebody's monthly budget if they're struggling. You go to a small house in East Urbana that used to rent for $600 a month, and if you look at the rents, at least 3, sometimes up to 6 months of rent are required just to satisfy the tax bill. So a huge part of why rents are going up in Champaign-Urbana, a huge part of why people are being pushed out of our town who are low income, is because everybody's maxing out the tax caps every year, We're all aware that the real estate tax burden is crushing for low-income seniors, for businesses, everything in Champaign-Urbana. This Friday, they're auctioning off tax-delinquent homes at Brookins, people who couldn't afford to pay their taxes this year. And I think we need to be serious about how destructive the power to tax is to people's lives, especially the most vulnerable members of our community. If we go ahead and approve this tax levy increase, and if the hospital tax bills come back on the tax rolls, our residents are going to find themselves paying the same $10 a month or even a little bit more on their tax bills next summer. And I don't think that that's the will of our constituents. We always hear people complain that MTD tax is too much. There's little signs in people's yards over in Urbana that says, "My family pays Carl's share of taxes." Our constituents, if this decision goes through the way we're trying to get it through in the circuit court, if it comes through and Carl comes back on the tax rolls, our constituents are expecting their taxes to go down. And by maxing out this tax levy, we're ensuring that it doesn't, that they get no relief. And I understand it's probably a moot point that the hospitals probably won't come back on the tax rolls, but I think it would be good if we didn't take all 17 and 15ths, leave a little bit of meat on the bone just so we can say, look, we're not grabbing every dollar we can. I think that's really what our constituents would want us to do. So I would move, maybe we try something more modest like let's say 6% increase to our levy for next year. And, you know, if it's just CPI, then that'll be more than enough to take care of the natural growth in the district. And if the hospitals come on the tax rolls, we'll get a nice little bump, but, you know, our people might get a little bit of relief. And I would hope that the other taxing districts look at it the same way and look out for the little guy on this one. So that's my 2 cents.
So the actual number's 13.08. It's not 17.15. It's in the not in the letter. Page 37.
Gotcha.
The actual resolution. 13.08 is the actual number. Any other question, discussion on this? Margaret?
I wanted to ask Phil, are you actually moving
Yes, that was a motion.
a real motion?
Yeah.
Oh. So well, state your motion in a motion form. You are moving that instead of 13.08.
We modify the levy, the resolution at hand, for 6% instead of 13%.
6%. Okay, so we have a motion on the floor to modify the tax levy for 2023 payable in 2024 to 6%. Is there a second? Is there a second? Motion dies for lack of a second. Additional comment on resolution 2023-5 from the board.
Yes.
Go ahead. Al.
Although as I said it last year with Phil's point and motion, I'm sympathetic to his analysis and logic, and I'm in the same business he is in, and I see and hear the same things. And I just think, based on the explanation that Carl gives, it's just best to leave it at that so we don't leave anything on the table in the future. And I just ultimately think that things play out. Now, I will say this. One of the things I didn't bring up in the budget, I noticed again that the annual passes are down year to date. And if we ever did fall into this additional money, I would certainly allocate a lot of it to free passes for low-income people to be qualified here, and use that money to take care of low-income families and people who are going to work and going to the doctor. And I feel that is our mission, to provide transportation to low-income families that don't have a trustee way of getting around. And so that's my fallback.
Well said. Thank you, Al. Additional comment on the levy proposal. Seeing and hearing none, I'll ask for a motion and a second to approve moving forward with resolution 2023-5 as presented.
So called, so moved.
It's been moved and seconded to approve resolution 2023-5, determining the amount of money necessary to be raised by the tax levy. I'll ask for a roll call.
Barnes,
Yes.
Chaplin,
Yes.
Fasella,
Nay.
Hannan,
Yes.
Nudo,
Yes.
Dial.
Yes. That motion carries. Thank you. Our next item is the adoption of Ordinance 2023-2, that's authorizing the issuance of capital facilities notes. Michelle.
Hello again. I'm back for another board meeting to talk about the line of credit. I'm Michelle Wright, the Finance Director. And really what we're doing is formalizing what you already approved at the last meeting. So this is the official ordinance to say that yes, we're going to borrow on the lines of credit and establish those with Prospect Bank as we discussed at the last meeting. Any questions?
Anybody had any questions since last month or thoughts on those documents? We've had these reviewed by corporate counsel and everything's on the up and up, I assume, yeah. Questions from the board? Seeing none, I'll ask for a motion to approve ordinance 2023-2.
So move.
It's been moved and seconded to approve ordinance 2023-2, authorizing the Mass Transit District to issue promissory notes to provide funds for certain corporate purposes and to take other actions in connection therewith. I'll ask for roll call.
Barnes.
Yes.
Chaplin.
Yes.
Fasella.
Yes.
Hannan.
Yes.
Nudo.
Yes.
Dial.
Yes, that motion carries. Thank you. Our next item is the Managing Director Spending Authority.
So as has been talked about already today, there's been inflation in the last few years. And as we're looking through some of our policies and procedures, the level of approval authority by the managing director has been at $50,000 for a few years. It would greatly help us move things along quicker for items that were under $100,000 if we increased his spending authority to less than $100,000. And it would bring anything beyond that to the board for approval. I'm guessing if we did do this, there'd even be some instances that we would still bring items so you're aware of them. They wouldn't just be officially for approval. So the proposal is to raise the spending authority for the managing director from $50,000 to under $100,000.
Questions from the board on this item? Bruce?
What does this allow you to do you can't do now?
Since in the calendar year 2022 and 2023, there were 7 projects that were under 100,000, but over 50,000 that we needed to come to the board for approval before we could move forward. And so some of these, one was the NEPA for the body shop, fall protection, Cohesity backup solution, that's a technology project, the server room cooling, electrical wiring upgrade, the audit, and commercial builders for the exterior panels. Those items would have been approved by the managing director and would not have come to the board for approval. And we would have, I mean, there is lead time built in when the board must approve because we have to make sure you guys have the information and can't move forward until the board meeting.
So that delays, yeah, right now it's being delayed till the next board meeting.
Right, those particular projects had to
On
wait.
the average, that's a couple of weeks.
Depends on when the project information comes
The
in.
average, yeah, it's a couple of weeks.
Bruce, I think the times that this will most frequently come into play are when we have had to come to you with a retroactive approval for something that is above my spending authority, but it's been deemed an emergency expenditure. So for instance, the delay may not seem like it's significant, but when we were putting the underground storage tanks in, and we had, they dig the hole for the tanks and it'd fill up with water. They'd get the water out and it'd fill up with water. And so we had to, in order to keep that project going and in order to keep the contractor on the job, we had to approve a change order that exceeded my spending authority. And I did it with my emergency powers to keep the project going. And then we came back at the next board meeting, and I believe Alan was rankled a little bit by the fact that we were coming with retroactive approval. You were very kind in your rankled response. But that's the kind of thing that we're trying to keep from happening, so that we're not asking for retroactive approval.
So what's wrong with that process? the emergency power?
Well, there's always a gray area about when what's an emergency and what's not an emergency. And some board members aren't thrilled when we come back and we're asking for approval for something that we've already done. So this gives staff the authority to make the determination as to whether or not it should be done.
The list of companies that are, I saw it in the back here, that have the authority for lots of companies around. The local ones were 50,000. Normal, Springfield, where the heck is it?
Page 90.
90.
Carl, has there been an occasion you can think of in recent memory where we've incurred additional expense or delayed a project where it's cost the district money or been I mean, has it actually interfered with anything that was an emergency, having it at 50,000 rather than 100?
So I'm not going to say that it's cost the district money. We have had delays because many of these projects, you have the month delay to award a contract, but then that delays the contractor from ordering parts. And in today's supply chain delayed world, that can add on certainly another month, but sometimes that compounds into 2 or 3 months additional time. And it might be a 6 or 9 month delay. And it just, again, as a for instance, with the underground storage tanks, we had one that was leaking, and so we were only using one, and we had a critical situation. I guess in this case it did cost the district money because we had the temporary tanks, and those were I don't think Josh is here today, but I think that there was like a normal 9-month arrival delay anyway on the tanks, and so not being able to get going with that contract delayed it even more, which cost us money to lease the temporary tanks. So that's not a very significant example of what you're asking about, but it is an example.
This reduces board control over spending to raise this level.
Technically, it does. I serve at your pleasure, Bruce, and my authority is based on your granting of me of authority and your trust in staff. But it does raise the threshold for things that have to come to the board. I mean, well, I'll leave it at that.
And I don't know if I'm going to go ahead for just a moment. I don't know if, obviously Springfield and Normal are some other local transit authorities. I don't know that they're comparable to the operation that we have here. Springfield and Normal, I'm sure that their ridership and their operation, both of those entities, pales in comparison to the operation that we have here.
Go ahead. That's a good point, Brett. So if I read this, you have the authority currently to approve and execute contracts and expenditures up to 50,000, or when an emergency procurement is required. So these items that we're spending are within the budget, the current budget, correct?
That is correct.
Okay. And the expenditure side, let's take a hypothetical. Let's say you had $75,000 expenditure, and then something happened, turned around, you had another $75,000 expenditure on the same issue. Follow me? In other words, then you could approve that, so it would be over the 100,000 in a short period of time. Would that be correct?
Actually, it's generally associated with each.
You know how projects go. You run into problems.
Yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about. So if there was a project, even in the case again of the underground storage tank, we can keep using that one all day long. You approved that contract, and then the change order exceeded $50,000, and so I used the emergency authority that you gave to staff to approve that. But if it wasn't an emergency, then that change order would have had to come to you. So if it were a project that, we can get crazy with hypotheticals and just make things up, but if there were a project that was within my spending authority, and for some reason, they found out that they were digging a hole in the ground and they hit something, or there was concrete buried under it, something that then that change order exceeded my spending authority, it's conceivable that the original project even was within my spending authority, but then because the change order was over 50,000, it would not be within my spending authority.
Yeah, but I think this would be an emergency,
Well,
If you're
yeah,
halfway through a
probably. I'm
project-
just trying to come up with a
Yeah.
hypothetical.
If you're
that-
halfway through a project, it's an emergency to get the thing finished. You can't stop it. I'm on the fence. I don't know.
Go ahead, Phil.
I would say, just because I'm involved in some other districts and we do this to our trustees all the time, but, if you guys ever run into a situation where you hit a concrete monolith underground or something, I'm usually around on Wednesday nights or whatever. You could probably get a quorum of us together relatively quickly. I don't know what our posting requirement is for the district.
Yeah, the Open Meetings Act would not allow for that, and we can't do, we can't do an email vote.
Can't do
or
a special
phone
meeting
call.
within a week?
Sure.
You could within a week,
Yeah,
yes.
I mean, post something within a few days, we could do a special meeting. I think we've got
Absolutely.
24, 72 hours on our other district, but, it's not instant, but we're all in town, we're all local, there's enough of us. I mean, if something, because I do like knowing how things are going, and it kind of gives us, like, knowing, hey, we hit some extra water and we had to tear out some more concrete. It's like, I've got a pulse for where the taxpayer money is going, and I think people want us to sort of know where things are being spent.
And I would absolutely inform you of that.
You could have an emergency of 125,000 if this were approved. Then we go through this again, the emergency and so on.
Additional board comment on this item. I'm going to ask for a motion and a second on this spending authority.
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to approve expansion of the managing director's spending authority to $100,000. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
Aye.
Me.
I went aye. I raised my hand with aye.
Motion carries. All right, that was our last item, our last action item. Our next meeting will begin with a public hearing on the tax levy, and then will be followed by the regular Board of Trustees meeting, and that will be Wednesday, December 6th, 2023 at 3 o'clock. Remind, this is a combined November-December meeting, so it'll be December 6th, 2023 at 3 o'clock, right here in the Illinois Terminal. Any other business before we adjourn? Seeing none, I'll ask for a motion and a second for adjournment.
So moved.
Seconded.
It's moved and seconded. All in favor to adjourn? Aye. We are adjourned. Thank you.